Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring the world of dance and fashion in Japan.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it should be fun. We'll be looking at how traditional and modern elements kind of like fuse together,
Yeah.
and we'll also touch on this concept of modesty in Japanese clothing.
That was fascinating.
It is, and all of this is inspired by a conversation we had with Rika Serrano, a Japanese woman who shared some really interesting insights about these topics.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So get this. She told us about her flamenco instructor.
Okay.
And this is where it gets kind of crazy. He used to be a singer,
Hmm.
and he performed with his wife, who was a belly dancer.
Wow, talk about a unique pairing. That fusion of flamenco and belly dancing is so intriguing.
I know, right? And it gets even cooler. The flamenco instructor is Mexican with mixed heritage,
Oh, wow.
and his wife, the belly dancer, is Japanese. So you've got this amazing blend of cultures all coming together on stage.
It really speaks to the universal language of dance, right? Like how it can transcend cultural boundaries and bring people together.
Exactly. And Rika loves both dance styles, but she admitted she has a soft spot for flamenco. Although she did say the belly dancing costumes were pretty captivating.
I can imagine. Belly dancing costumes are known for their intricate designs and vibrant colors.
Oh, yeah. She actually described them as uh, elegantly designed, showing a bit of the belly while maintaining grace.
Hmm. That's a really interesting observation. I think it speaks volumes about how different cultures approach the concept of allure.
Yeah, like some cultures emphasize overt displays, while others, like in this case, seem to prioritize elegance and grace.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance between sensuality and refinement.
It makes me wonder, though, how popular is belly dancing in Japan overall?
Well,
Rika mentioned it was a bit of a fitness trend for a while, but it's not really seen as a mainstream performance art there.
right.
You mostly see it in Turkish restaurants, apparently.
That's interesting. Belly dancing has such deep roots in Middle Eastern cultures. It's been an integral part of their history and artistic expression for
Oh,
centuries.
for sure.
So to see it pop up in Japan, even in these niche settings, raises some interesting questions about cultural exchange and adaptation.
Totally. Like, has belly dancing been kind of Japanified? Maybe the costumes are adapted or the movements are blended with elements of traditional Japanese dance to make it more in line with local preferences?
That's a really compelling theory. It makes sense that cultural expressions would evolve as they travel across borders. They often absorb local influences and transform to fit new contexts.
Yeah, it's like they take on a new life while still honoring their origins.
Exactly. It's a beautiful example of how cultures can enrich and influence each other.
This whole conversation has got me thinking about modesty in Japanese clothing in general. It seems like it's a pretty big deal there.
It is. It's a topic that goes beyond just fashion.
Yeah.
It touches on cultural values, aesthetics, and how societies view the body.
You're so right. Enrica really emphasized that Japanese women often prefer outfits that offer more coverage. The goal isn't to be revealing, but to create this sense of grace and elegance.
Hmm. It's interesting how different cultures have different ideas about what's considered attractive or appropriate in terms of clothing.
Totally. Enrica even mentioned that oversized clothing is super popular in Japan because it has this slimming effect.
Makes sense. It's like they've found a way to look stylish while still adhering to those cultural values of modesty.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It reminds me of what she said about traditional kimonos. She explained how the back of the neck was seen as this subtly sexy area because the garment covered everything else.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. It's like they flipped the script on what's considered alluring. Instead of overt displays, they're highlighting a specific area through strategic coverage.
Exactly. And it creates this sense of mystery and intrigue.
I wonder if this preference for understated allure extends beyond just clothing choices.
Ooh, that's a good question. Like, does it influence other forms of artistic expression in Japan? Music? Visual art?
Something to think about. But speaking of Western fashion, Rika had this hilarious quote about Victoria's Secret.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
She said, "There's no secret left to Victoria's Secret."
I laughed out loud when she said that. It's like the perfect encapsulation of this whole cultural difference we've been talking about.
Right. What's considered appealing or marketable in one culture can be completely different in another.
And brands need to understand that if they want to be successful in different markets.
Absolutely. It all comes down to cultural awareness and sensitivity.
So we've talked about modesty, cultural adaptation, and how cultural values can shape perceptions of beauty.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey so far.
But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
We have. There's still so much more to explore.
All right, well, then let's dive even deeper.
Let's do it. So we've been talking about how modesty is like a core value in traditional Japanese culture. But Ryaka also pointed out that things are changing, right?
Mm.
Especially with those younger generations being influenced by like K-pop and Western fashion.
Yeah, it's like there's this kind of like tug of war happening between tradition and these new global trends.
Right. It's a dynamic we see in cultures all around the world. Globalization's made it so much easier for like trends and ideas to spread. But when they meet an existing culture, it's not just a simple absorption. It's more of a negotiation, a blending of like the new with the old.
Like adding a new spice to an old family recipe.
Right.
Right. There.
Exactly. You might change the flavor a bit, but those core ingredients are still there. So in Japan, you've got this younger generation that's super exposed to K-pop fashion, which can be a lot more revealing.
Yeah, way more than traditional Japanese clothing for sure.
Right. And yet they're also growing up with these deeply ingrained values
Hmm.
about modesty and subtlety. So it creates
Yeah.
this really interesting tension.
That makes me wonder, like, how do they reconcile that? Do they kind of like create a new style that blends the two?
Yeah, it's likely that they're picking and choosing elements from both sides,
Mhm.
adapting them to fit their own personal preferences and social contexts.
So it's not necessarily a rejection of traditional values, but more like a reinterpretation, right?
Hmm.
Making those values relevant to their own lives.
Exactly. It's a constant evolution, the dance between preserving what's valued and embracing what's new.
Hmm.
But even with all those external influences, I think it's important to remember that core aesthetic that runs so deep in Japanese culture.
Oh, absolutely. That emphasis on subtlety, grace, and elegance.
Yeah, like they've mastered the art of suggestion rather than like overt display.
Less is more. That seems to be their motto.
Right. And that principle extends beyond fashion. It's in their architecture, social interactions, even their business negotiations.
I have heard that Japanese gardens are like a perfect example of this aesthetic.
Oh, for sure. They're all about creating a sense of peace and tranquility through carefully arranged natural elements. It's not about bombarding the senses, but creating this harmonious and balanced experience.
It's about the feeling it evokes, right? Not just what you see.
Exactly. And you see that same principle reflected in so many other aspects of Japanese culture. Their calligraphy, pottery, their minimalist approach to interior design.
Hmm. That's interesting. So it's all about creating a sense of balance and harmony, letting things breathe.
Precisely. And it makes me wonder how this emphasis on subtlety and restraint plays out in their everyday interactions. Are they like as reserved in person as their fashion choices might suggest?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess it all comes back to how cultural values shape social behavior.
Right. In Japan, there's a huge emphasis on politeness, maintaining social harmony, avoiding confrontation. It's considered rude to be like overly expressive or draw attention to yourself.
So those values of modesty and restraint extend beyond clothing. It becomes part of their social etiquette.
Exactly. Like public displays of affection are way less common in Japan compared to some Western cultures. It's not that they don't express affection, it's just done in much more subtle
Such
ways.
a different language of love, I guess.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's a reminder that what might seem strange or unfamiliar to us can have really deep cultural roots.
And that there are so many different ways of being in the world, each with its own unique beauty and wisdom.
I couldn't agree more. It's about embracing that diversity, approaching other cultures with an open mind and a willingness to learn.
And sometimes it's those subtle differences, the nuances of behavior and expression that really reveal the heart of a culture.
Absolutely. So we've talked about modesty, cultural adaptation, this Japanese aesthetic that values subtlety and grace.
Mm.
But I wonder if we need to dig a little deeper into this whole idea of modesty. What does it really mean in the context of Japanese culture? Is it just about covering up?
Yeah, is there something more to it?
Right. Because the word modesty can be kind of tricky. It often carries all this cultural baggage and preconceived notions. In some cultures, it's seen as a way to oppress women, limiting their choices and self-expression.
It definitely has different connotations depending on where you are in the world.
For sure.
Yeah.
But in Japan, it seems like it's more about cultivating an inner beauty, a sense of grace and elegance that comes from within.
So it's not about hiding the body, but presenting it in a way that's respectful and refined.
Exactly. And I think there's something really refreshing about that, especially in a world that often equates beauty with revealing the body.
It's like they're saying you can be attractive and captivating without being overtly sexy.
Right. And it's a reminder that true beauty isn't about conforming to trends or seeking external validation. It's about embracing your individuality, honoring your cultural heritage, and expressing yourself authentically.
So it's about being true to yourself and letting that inner beauty shine through.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that true beauty goes beyond the superficial. It's about those qualities that make you feel confident, comfortable, and at ease in your own skin.
I really love that idea. It's like they've redefined what it means to be beautiful and desirable.
And it's a message that resonates across cultures and time. True beauty comes in many forms, and true elegance lies in embracing your individuality and expressing it with confidence and grace.
I think that's a really powerful message. So we've explored modesty, cultural adaptation, and this fascinating Japanese aesthetic that emphasizes subtlety and grace. But I can't help but wonder how these values play out in other areas of Japanese life, like their work ethic, their approach to technology, their sense of community.
Those are all fascinating questions,
Hmm.
and they highlight how cultural values can shape a society's entire worldview.
It's like culture is a lens through which we see and experience the world.
Exactly. And as we learn more about different cultures, we gain a much richer and more nuanced perspective on our own lives.
Okay, well then let's keep exploring. It's fascinating how we've been talking about modesty and fashion in Japan, but it makes you wonder, are there any fashion trends or styles that are like universally appealing?
That's a great question. It's something that people have been debating for ages. Are we all just shaped by our own cultures when it comes to what we find beautiful? Or are there some underlying things that everyone finds appealing?
Yeah, like are there any aesthetic principles that just transcend cultural boundaries? Maybe things like balance or proportion. I don't know. It's a tough one.
It is. I mean, there are definitely some aesthetic elements that seem to resonate across cultures, those ideas of balance, harmony, proportion you mentioned.
Mm.
But even then, they can be expressed in totally different ways depending on the cultural context.
So it's not just about the element itself, but how it's used.
Exactly. Like think about colors for a sec. In some cultures, bright, vibrant colors are seen as super joyful and festive. But in other cultures, it's the more muted tones that are considered elegant and sophisticated.
It's like everyone sees the world through a different lens, shaped by their own culture.
I love that analogy.
Mhm.
And those cultural lenses, they don't just shape how we see beauty.
Mhm.
They influence everything.
Yeah.
How we interact with each other, how we express ourselves, even how we experience the world around us.
Wow. Yeah, that's so true. It's been amazing to dive into this topic with you. It's really made me realize just how powerful cultural influences can be.
Me too. And I think Rika's insights were so valuable in helping us understand this whole interplay between culture and personal expression.
Totally. So as we wrap things up, is there like one key takeaway you'd want our listeners to remember from this deep dive?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is that culture is this powerful force that shapes so much of who we are and how we see the world.
Yeah.
Our perceptions, our preferences, even our understanding of ourselves, something we often don't even think about. But it has a huge impact on our lives.
That's a great point. And it kind of leads us to a final thought-provoking question for our listeners. As our world becomes more globalized and interconnected, is modesty and fashion becoming more or less relevant? What do you think? How does your culture influence your own clothing choices and your perceptions of beauty? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and embrace the beauty of cultural diversity.